Hey folks, this is Julie Heffernan talking to you from Woodstock, New York with a beautiful Sharon Horvath painting behind me. I'm delighted that you'll be watching my talk from Vermont Studio Center several years ago and hope you enjoy it. And please stay safe, everyone. Okay, bye-bye.
So I'm starting here, semi-present day, close to present day, and I'm going to go back and forward in time. I'm starting with this one just to kind of give you a sense of the latest show. It was called Sky is Falling at PPOW. It's the traveling show that was mentioned is also entitled Sky is Falling. It kind of hit me like a sledgehammer that we're at a real pivotal point environmentally, and we as visual artists, we have a bully pulpit, which is our artwork, and so I decided that it was obvious that I had to use whatever voice I might have through my work to talk about what is really some interesting days ahead, or decades ahead, with climate change and all that. So the show Sky's Falling is about climate change. I'm certainly not didactic in it. I did want to name names and point fingers. So on the trees are incised illusionistically, the names of climate change deniers and things like that. But basically, which was kind of fun to do. But basically, these were musings on how we might remake the world if we're so lucky to survive what's going to come. But I'm going to go back in time to talk about where I grew up, the beginnings of this. So I was born in the Midwest in Peoria. Moved to the East Bay, moved to California. Actually, it wasn't the East Bay first. It was Marin County, which was kind of a cowboy town. Then we moved to the East Bay in Hayward. My parents, working class, Irish Catholic, Irish and German Catholics. No art in the home at all. This is kind of, what my family looked like. And so contrasting this, the only painting, and I'm always very curious with visual people, what their first visual event or visual moment is that they remember. And for me, it was this kind of sfumato-ish picture, Da Vinci-esque picture, probably from blue chip stamps, of Jesus. Looking a little like that, very Svengali looking, kind of certainly not looking like my brother and father with their crew cuts, and being very compelled by that long-haired, sort of semi-androgynous man. Not only as a Catholic, but just as this kind of odd personage, somebody who didn't look like anybody I was growing up with. So the other art that you'd find in my home, that suburban house, were when you'd open the medicine cabinet. I don't know how many of you were brought up Catholic, but you'd open the medicine cabinet and there would be these little holy cards that were these very intricate, bizarre, surreal nooks where all of the banality of the Sears and Roebuck catalog furniture that I grew up with would be undone by these weird, surreal moments. Like St. Agnes holding, or St. Lucy, St. Agnes, Lucy holding her eyeballs, So, and again, hidden in the medicine cabinet. So kind of like an advent calendar where you'd open a secret door and there would be a whole other world. That's what these holy cards provided. So I can't help but feel that my work was deeply influenced by that. However, when I went to college, I went to UC Santa Cruz, all my teachers were pretty much minimalists, either conceptual artists or minimalists. So the kinds of blood and gut images from those holy cards were very much not the case with my education. There's the canning of the shit by who is it?
Manzoni.
Manzoni, thank you. That kind of thing was not the reason I was making art. And that's probably the case with all of us. But nevertheless, I soldiered on. I was always interested in the figure. But I knew from theory that the figure was problematic, which I'll talk about later. But this painting happened in 1999. So I was in college, undergrad in 81 and grad school in 83. So it took me till 16 years before I had made a painting that I could kind of own, in that way that you don't hate it and throw it out. It was called Self-Portrait as Infanta Maria Teresa, Dreaming Madame de Sade, which, right there from the title gives you a sense of the kind of layering that I was interested in. With Infanta Maria Teresa, she was the wife of Louis the Sun King, and she was a kind of a homely, very religious woman, and Louis the Sun King was, that crazy guy with the gigantic wig. So, I could imagine a really interesting relationship there. And Madame de Sade married to Marquis de Sade, who was the famous libertine. He wrote 100 Days of Sodom, the first porn book, I guess, that we know of that's classic. So another case of really interesting relationships. And I was interested at the time in these, and still am, in these little thought bubbles. Do you have a laser pointer thing? Okay, never mind. Anyway, so there's little thought bubbles, and I was thinking of them as sort of tributaries of thought, with the idea that here's this kind of burlesque queen holding these two snarling lemurs, and she has this title. So we're thinking, we're reading those, Madame de Sade and Infanta Maria Teresa through her, and so I'm hoping for this layering of storytelling. And, if you look at the different little thought bubbles, you can take the story down those different tributaries if you're so inclined. And that was all well and good until I was maybe 5-10 years later. I was on the train going to some lecture. I'm going to a lecture gig, thinking about what I was going to say, thinking about this painting, and suddenly had this memory of when we first moved to California from the Midwest. So that was in the 60s, and hippies were burgeoning, and you remember my crew cut family. So we took a little family picnic to Golden Gate Park. Has anybody been to San Francisco? Golden Gate Park, it's, all the wonderful fog and the hippies were abundant. And so we had our little wicker picnic basket, our little bologna sandwiches, and there we were in Golden Gate Park with our, surfer shirts or whatever we wore at the time. And very Midwestern, very boring. And out of the bushes comes this long-haired man wearing a cape and a jockstrap only. I think he was pursued by cops, but maybe that's me embroidering. I don't remember. But I remember that I was transfixed, and the next thing I knew, my mother had picked up the picnic basket and plunked it on my head so that I wouldn't be looking at this guy who, was clearly pornographic. And it sealed in my brain this vision of a little wild freedom, a little, burlesque madness, which was the exact antidote to all of that Ozzie and Harriet stuff that I'd grown up with. So that, I realized on that train ride, was the real genesis of this painting. Despite all of the other embroidering of our conceptual thinking, there's always that deeper level of content that I think is the difference between between, shall I say, a real painting and an attempt. In any case, something was going on there that was drawing from something deeper than in my earlier work. Anyway, so now I'm going back in time to the late 80s. I was on a Fulbright to Berlin. Really interesting time. This is before the wall came down, and there was no thought that the wall would come down. As you know, Berlin was a little island in the midst of the socialist state. And surrounding the island was the wall. And the wall was full of graffiti, which we added to. And on the other side of the wall was, the East Berlin side was stark white with the DMZ zone. And in that island with that wall as a kind of a wailing wall, there was a really interesting conversation going on about using figuration, because remember, figuration was out all through the 60s, 70s. But it was happening with the Neue Wilde movement in Berlin with a vengeance, because the East German side used the figure in the form of socialist realism to propagandize about the worker state and to glorify the worker, right? So they needed the figure for their propaganda. And the West, conversely, used the figure to show the ugliness of humankind. So there was a really interesting conversation going on back and forth between the freedom to critique versus the potential glory of freeing the worker from the shackles of capitalism. So in that environment, I was taking on the figure with a vengeance, making these ironic, kind of obnoxious Picasso meets Tintoretto sort of screeds about the stupidity of humankind. They were big. They're still rolled up in my basement if anyone wants one. I can't just shred them, which I should. We were talking about that at dinner. So they were all about the fecklessness of humankind, and I made a lot of them. At the same time that I was making a lot of these screeds, I was also seeing a lot of artwork and noticing that the kind of work that I was drawn to was not of the screed ilk, but of a very different kind of quiet subversiveness, like the Fantin Latour, where the flowers are so ripe they're kind of falling out of the vase, or this unswept floor of sosos, which is just the dregs of kitchen activity on the floor in mosaic form. And I kind of love that. All the while I was making these gigantic, obnoxious things. Thrown around a lot of paint, so that was good, but making a lot of them. And kind of despairing at the same time. I would make them, I would be really invested in them, and then I'd finish them and just say, oh, I don't feel anything for this. I don't love this. I don't care about this. It was a weird kind of dead feeling after all the involvement of the making. So at that time, I think I was getting my 10,000 hours in that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, because this very interesting thing started to happen in the midst of my hard work and despair, where I would pass out at the end of a long day of painting, and just before sleep, so in that state between waking and sleeping, I started to notice this flood of images that would come into my head that I'd never noticed before, and maybe you all have had them since you were age 1, but I hadn't. And they were really intriguing. It was kind of like watching somebody else's movie, and they weren't memories, they weren't daydreams, they were really like emanations from somebody else's movie. And I would just lie back and watch them until they'd fade away. But I in the midst of this despairing period, it was feeling to me like, well, if there is a kind of a font of creativity, dare I say that, this could be it. So maybe it would be smart to follow it. So I pretty much stopped all my Tintoretto meets Picasso, and I just took up a very kind of dumb way of painting that I equate with, beginning painting still life, where you just paint light into dark, dark into light. As I see this room now, I see light and shadow. Basically, I wanted to paint the way I saw these images in a very matter-of-fact way, so that I could see them better. And at the same time, this one over here on the right, I went through a period of painting an image and then throwing a lot of solvent at it to kind of dissolve it. So I was literalizing the idea of just needing to dissolve the past and start to bring in this new way of painting. So again, these are big. These are all about 6 foot. I call them self-portrait as fallen angel, things like that, because I was thinking of them as looking inside, and the whole painting experience became very, very open, like a journal page, where something would occur to me and I could pop it on there and I could glaze over it, pop another thing on somewhere else, with the idea that the still life, which was the mechanism to teach me how to paint light and shadow, kind of held the images. So it was a really great period for just teaching myself new tricks, new I don't want to say tricks, but new techniques in order to see these image streaming things. A self-portrait is rec. And the whole time I was thinking that the still life was just the excuse for the thought bubbles, until I read a wonderful book by Norman Bryson called Looking at the Overlooked, about the history of still life. And in it he talks about not only, like the Juan Sanchez de Cotin, not only is still life metaphysically brilliant, this being a logarithmic tracing of the universe, this Juan Sanchez de Cotin, but the Peter Erickson over there on the left, turns out that he was doing what I was doing, where the unimportant image, the hierarchically less significant image, is the big one in, that you first see, the butcher's stall, and the hierarchically more significant image is the little thought bubble in the back, which is Mary giving alms to the beggar, and that was a reflection of what I was doing. And suddenly, all of this graduate school discussion of art coming out of, sort of sui generis out of your head, fell away, and art became about speaking to art over time, speaking to ideas over time. And that shifted my thinking about innovation. We always want to be so innovative. And suddenly that became less important, and what became more important was the idea of this conversation, So that was great. Great in the sense of the kind of vitamins you need to keep you making art. If you're constantly pushing yourself to innovate, then you end up almost becoming a trickster, or at worst, a fraud, just inventing gimmicks, which I was seeing so much at that time, especially through the 70s and 80s. There was so much stylistic gimmickry. Anyway, so here's a few more. This is Self-Portrait as Gourmand. At that point, the table's getting more and more full. Until this painting came along. This is birth painting. And I was pregnant at the time, and I was, painting, as I do, with the idea that the still life was less important, as I described, when suddenly I stepped back at this painting and realized that the still life itself, how I was forming it, was very much a kind of what I thought of as a reflection of what you could say was happening in my belly, as growing life, which is kind of, beautiful, horrible. Kind of, tumorous and terrifying and fantastic. And so, the painting stopped being just an excuse for the thought bubbles and became a reflection of, of the state. Anyway, so I finished this piece with this little central text that says, "I opened up my legs and the boy fell out of me." So that was the first really personal still life painting. Anyway, then came along Dave Hickey's Invisible Dragon, 4 Essays on Beauty, which was very influential because the term beauty had not been used in art making since Ruskin. But he was talking about beauty in terms of persuasiveness, enfranchising the viewer. Beauty provides the pathos to recommend the logos, the idea that you need sensual, something to grab the viewer's eye, and then you can insinuate your more subversive ideas through that. But he also talks about two different kinds of space. This is the Caravaggio over here is masculine space that protrudes out at you, versus the Tiepolo, which is feminine space that invites you to enter it. And I was getting more and more involved in these kind of complex landscapes that were very much in their form, asking you to enter them more and more deeply. As you go through the trees, and then you go through the hoop of berries, and then beyond into the pool where a kind of a fallen Icarus is. So the form of the painting was a reflection of these burgeoning feminist ideas that I was playing with in my studio. because I didn't really know what my content was. This is way back in, oh gosh, what was this? I don't know, about maybe 92, 94. And I was still kind of figuring out my content. I, had been using these thought bubbles, but I didn't quite know what they added up to. So it so happened that a life event sort of changed everything. I had my first son, and then a couple years later I was pregnant again, but having pains, and so I thought I was miscarrying. But then the pains got acute, and I hobbled to Methodist Hospital, which is down the street from where I live in Brooklyn, and it turned out to be an ectopic pregnancy, which is a pregnancy in the fallopian tube, and I'd never heard of that term, and I didn't know that it's like an appendix, that if it ruptures, you can die. So thank God for Methodist Hospital and modern medicine, they took it out, and I was left with the bandage. And suddenly this whole different orientation to the female nude, which I had always loved, but was, as I said before, very irrelevant all through the 70s and certainly the 80s, with the whole discussion of the male gaze and the objectification of women. It made sense to just leave it. It didn't make it, there was no relevance to it anymore. But suddenly, with this event, it became relevant as an aspect of women's history that that I hadn't seen painted about. So I call the self-portrait as Infanta Maria Teresa playing Coriolanus, about scars, the kind of scars you show as heroic and the kind of scars that you hide. And suddenly, the nude was back in my life, both in the female and also in these babies that I now had, and was contending with, in terms of being a mother and a teacher and an artist. So the paintings became about that. And this one became significant because in this painting I learned about composing to tell the story. So what I mean by that is that if the subject matter is the mother and the baby united, because here they are with their genitalia lined up, she's him and he's her, it's also the baby is either struggling to pull away or the mother's pushing the baby away. So there's a kind of a sense of spiraling. The baby's, leaving the parental, the maternal unit. And so the story is something like this. And then as I was painting the events around the figure, a kind of spiral happened like this that you can follow through the arrows down the leg of the putti behind, pushing over the vase, which drips the water, which runs through the mice and the little village, up the hill around the smoke of the burning temple. And so it's a movement like this. So a spiraling like this and a spiraling like this in the composition, reflected in the subject matter, helped me to understand that they have to be one and the same. So parsing what a narrative painting is became more and more important, because I knew I wasn't interested in the classic narrative paintings that I was seeing either by my contemporaries, where the story is kind of in your face and turgid. And I also wasn't interested in the kind of the linear narrative St. Jerome that you see in museums, that kind of, these are the episodes of his life. But what is a story? So I was invited to speak on narrative painting, so I knew I had to have something to say. So I read a lot of things and finally stumbled on this essay by Frank Kermode, who's a famous literary critic. And it's called Secrets in Narrativity. And in it he talks about how there's the sort of surface layer of events, but then as you read deeper into the text, these key words will rise up that take you to a deeper level of meaning, and he calls these key words secrets. So I was wondering if there was the equivalent in art. So I found myself looking at this Vermeer and The Woman in the Balance, and it's this exquisite meditation on where do we find the divine? Do we find it through earthly treasures, or do we find it through heavenly? And So there's all kinds of gorgeous things going on. Look, there are the earthly treasures with their little glints, their little pearly glints. There's that line straight down the middle, which separates the light from the dark. And there, right in the middle, is a little triangle. There's all the triangles of the scale, and there's triangles all throughout. But right in the middle, you can see her little fingers holding the balance. And you see how the little glints on the fingers create a little upward pointing triangle? Basically saying, the divine is only to be found in, the heavenly realm. So it's like this little charged moment of gorgeous, using highlights for transcendent brilliance in the tiniest little way. So that's the secret. It occurred to me. So then I found myself looking at this Rembrandt and, the gorgeous Sacrifice of Isaac with that crazy knife right about to pierce his throat or, on a trajectory towards his throat. But it was when my eye caught on the hand over here that opens to let the knife go. And behind the hand is this red cloud that I had that kind of, intake of breath which you get when you are in the presence of something fantastic and surprising, and felt the secret happen there. The idea of the blood not spilt, of Isaac. So secrets, and I'm not saying that Rembrandt intended that. I'm saying secrets happen in the viewer. When you get a moment of felt meaning, you will feel it in your body. So finally, this one, and by the way, I just started a blog called Painters on Paintings, which is going to be launched next week, where I talk about this one, but I will give you a preview. This is Bonnard, brilliant painting. I remember seeing it, 10, 15 years ago, and it's the strangest painting. Has anybody seen this painting? Nobody? Okay, so it's such a weird painting. Imagine that there's hardly any paint on it. It's just little scrufflings of orange. And the only thick paint is on that weird object towards the bottom, these little clots of brown. So everybody knows the story of Bonnard, that he and his wife kind of receded into the countryside. She was a very secretive woman. He didn't even know her real name until, I think, 27 years after he met her. When he was marrying her, he found out her name was not Marie Boursin, but it was Marie something else. She had a weird illness that kept her in the bathtub. So there was a strange remoteness. The two of them were oddballs. I love them. Here's a scene. Imagine a situation where, you're living with this woman and she's such a secret. You're living with the other, whatever the other means to you. In his case, the wife, she's secretive. She's coming out of her tub, her toilette. He happens upon her in this intimate moment. She's turned away from him. He's trying to know her. You know how when you get a peek into somebody, you want to know them. So he sees on the floor this object that is the kind of repository of her utter otherness. And he picks it up to inspect it. And you can tell that it's not like a chair with a robe over it, because if you look at the bottom, you'll see these little knuckles and thumbs. So suddenly you see that those are hands holding something, because it kind of looks like a chair, right, with something thrown over it. But no, it's a foreground object really in our space, right? It becomes us holding this thing. And what are we holding? But a minstrel rag is the hypothesis of some, which to me is so utterly subversive. I mean, I have never in the history of art seen anybody paint a minstrel rag. And the reason that I feel like, this is actually Bob Berlind who came up with this, and when he talked about it, I just remember saying, hot damn, that is what it is, because it's so weirdly scribbled. It's not scribbled the way that fabric would be scribbled, or the way that a magazine page would be scribbled. It's scribbled like the way women used to sop up their menstrual blood, with these rags. And I used to do this because I was too poor to buy, Kotex. So I know what it looks like. Little moment of intimacy there. Anyway, so this to me is like the greatest art historical secret around, and now you guys are all privy. Cool. I think Bonnard is such an underestimated modern master. He's so weird. Anyway, so just to get back to me, so I was at this phase. I'm still working with these different sized figures. Children were looking so surreal to me. I was interested more and more in the accoutrements of clothes and hair, but I wasn't interested in hair and clothes. So I was looking for alternatives to them. So there she is holding a kind of an inchoate skirt. This thing she's holding is functioning like a skirt, and her head is kind of on fire. And here's a few more. So in this case, her hair and the berries kind of conflate and sort of burst. Her head kind of bursts. I'm very interested in bursting, I realize. This is the painting that happened after 9/11, which I saw happen on our roof, the second plane, drive into the second World Trade Tower, and knew that our lives had changed, and it seared into my brain this piercing of a giant monolith of a building by this plane. And it took me several years of just trying to contend with that image before I dealt with my own tower, which wasn't working, and it was when I split it open to kind of reveal all these mad scientists inside, and then split open their dresses to have all this stuff revealed, that it made the whole, I was able to kind of make sense of this, not really make sense, but deal with this thing that happened. So a lot of the work, so all this next work is the Iraq War is going on. I listen to NPR in my studio all day, so I'm filled up with war, George Bush, taking us into these places we shouldn't go, and kind of writhing with anger. So a lot of these paintings come out of this, just wanting to, again, contend with things that I have no power over. So this one, it's floorless. It's an image of a kind of interior where, like Versailles, where the seats of power reside, where war machinery is conjured up, war strategizing. And I wanted to play with the ceiling mural, with the feeling that the characters on the ceiling mural were both very firmly ensconced in that mural, but starting to kind of fall out of it. So there they are. I'm not interested in the kind of surrealism where they would actually be falling, but I love that liminal place between it's believable and it's starting to crumble in its logic. Here's another one. The chandeliers. Maybe you can see. I don't know. Is it obvious that there's images in the chandeliers? I never know. I don't want it to be too obvious. I want it to be the kind of thing where you see it on second glance, just like with the still lifes, where you thought you were just dealing with a traditional still life, and then suddenly all these other images show themselves. The same kind of thing here, where it's on second viewing, you see all of the little moments. The commentary. This one as well. So portrait is agnostic. This is the burning of Baghdad. So there's Baghdad right there. There's a relationship between the pods at the bottom that are giving rise to the moths, and the moths are attracted to the flames, and as they go through the flames, they kind of become these birds that fly off. So I don't start with preliminary drawings ever. I always start with kind of an inchoate image. In this case, it was the skirt with a little burning city, which I'll paint with the idea that I'm kind of waiting to see, just sort of like a fiction writer, like what's going to happen, why is this here, what's the context for it. So it was when all those things happened around it that it started to make sense, kind of as fires of purgatorial fires, that where cleansing occurs. This is where you can't get the Catholic girl out of the, so yeah, there's kind of, I tend to paint until something slightly redemptive happens in my own way, which I don't want to be the case, but that's just what I'm stuck with. Okay, this is a bad slide. Sorry. So we'll move on. But anyway, these are more of the skirts. I was interested in the idea that this is the moment where she's holding the fruit, and she's just in a second she can move her arms and the fruit will fall. So it's that moment just before the spill. And same thing. This is the next few are the from the booty show. So again, this idea that just like Agnes is holding her eyeballs, or Lucy, which one was it? I always mix it up. These are kind of her attributes. So the animal skirts are, and then in the wallpaper behind is the thought bubbles of yore made their way into the wallpaper behind, where what I discovered in those Berlin paintings that were big and obnoxious is that you can be a lot more biting in your social commentary if it's small and not so in your face. That's what I discovered from the thought bubbles, and that's what worked its way into the wallpaper. So behind her is all this social commentary on our foolishness. And then so as the body exploded with the fruit and the dead animals, there was a point where it shifted to the head, and the head started to explode. Inside that is this whole kind of labyrinthine world where all sorts of things kind of pop out, and I can, again, insinuate all my social commentary into and around the Baroque paraphernalia. This one as well, her head's kind of exploding. There's the social commentary behind, and she's sitting on kind of a flayed earth. There's a kind of a topographical earth rug that she's sitting on. And then that earth rug became its own world, where the world became the head that was exploding. And so then I went inside the exploding head to see what was there. And so then the rooms presented themselves. So, and I wish I had some details, but I don't. But there's tubs of octopi. There's a woman on a couch with things coming out of her. There's all kinds of things going on. And that was really interesting to paint and to explore. But then what really got me interested was how to get in there. So that's when the roller coaster kind of pathway presented itself. Because it's sort of not what you find, but how you get to find it. Isn't that kind of, it's the journey sort of thing? So anyway, so I created this whole journey where you start at that little, outside the wall, that little ladder, and then you take the roller coaster ride fraught with impediments and pitfalls until you kind of work your way across a very tenuous bridge to get inside.
Sorry, how big is that piece?
So these are all 6-footish. Yeah. So here it is again. The rooms kind of grew bigger. It sort of vaguely starts with like lower chakra activities towards the bottom. Vaguely there's more brutality at the bottom, and there's more kind of, odd, ambiguous things happening in the middle, and then kind of a sense of an idea of potential transcendence as you get to the top. But again, it was the events happening around it. So you see the little camp over there with a little clothesline and the drying socks and things, and then then making your way in. So there's, oh dear, well, hard to see, but so it painting these is always very interesting because, again, I don't work them out beforehand. So what ends up happening is kind of like the thought bubbles, where as I'm painting one, I'm sort of doing a mental juggling act where I'm kind of trying to take note of the things that swim into my head as I'm painting, a man looking under this table, to see, like, it's kind of like what's under the table becomes maybe the thing in the room next to it. So things start to link up, in a way. And again, this idea of working into your method the looseness and tightness, so that, like, I would use a lot of these framed images to make little abstract paintings that would hopefully loosen my arms so that I could take that looseness and squiggle something over here that then, I think it's called apophenia is the word for when you see pictures in the clouds. I think I just learned that word. Anyway, so, you can have the apophenic event of seeing what's in the scribble. Okay, so anyway, we're getting towards the end. This is the show that's just up. This is a very overly red image, so it's not actually like this. I'm going to switch this slide out when I get back. Anyway, self-portrait is after party. So the sky is falling. Back there, it's a mess, and she's kind of trying to clean up. This is running amok. Again, there's kind of bad stuff going on behind. The sky is falling. All these shards of sky are things we don't need anymore, like ExxonMobil, storage tanks, and ExxonMobil headquarters is over there at the bottom, and contaminated fuel fields and the like. So actually, I think I kind of messed up the order. So those last ones are the show that just came down, but this is actually. Are you guys okay? Yeah. Okay. Because I don't know how that got screwed up, but it did. It was my fault. Anyway, so this is a little bit before that. This is the point where I was thinking about soldiers. I was I'd started this painting. It was a young man. I was kind of done with the women, and I was painting this young man, and he had all these armaments. And I remember my son, who's now out of college, but he was just going off to college, coming down to the studio, and kind of, he was going to say something to me about his lunch or whatever, but I noticed that his face he kind of made this face. And I take critique wherever I can get it, and the way that my kids will, this is an important thing to notice in your studios. When somebody comes in, let's say that the painting's right here and you're here. So if they come in and they talk to you, but they're looking at the work, that it's got something. But if they come in, they'll glance at the work, but then they talk to you, that you don't have anything. So that would happen a lot with my kids, where I would get these, like, I call them the roundabout critique. Anyway, he made this face, and I remember realizing, oh no, that's not what I want to say about young men. So I switched it all up, and I gave him a tool belt for things he would need, and a backpack full of images of wisdom that he could take into his life beyond us. So the images of wisdom are this El Greco, which is amazing. I won't go into it, but it's a whole mannequin thing, black, white, top, above, below, male, female. There's this crazy fallopian tube thing with his robe that's just wild. So, it's like El Greco understanding the union nature of male, female within this figure. This incredible Titian, where it's a treatise on suffering as her hair becomes fire that disintegrates her. This is Mary Magdalene. And those images of wisdom were the thing that I could give him to go off into life. So anyway, these next few are about these young men in flight. At the setting off on a journey. And here's another one. He's strapped with this kind of pregnant ball. I I'm giving him his femaleness. Here's another one where he's in charge of taking care of this pregnant ball that's full of turkey heads and things, where if he pulls these ropes right, they will pull the tree branches that will shift the ship that will water the pregnant ball. So, and here's after that, self-portrait cleaning house. So these are all, again, about everything's blowing up and I'm trying to trim the wild hairs. So I've been allowing myself to go into places like trees and make worlds there. So there's some of the activity. Now we're back to this Skies Falling show, this self-portrait catastrophic failure. There's a little, there's clocks all over. And she's, got her hose. She's trying to put out the fire. So I'm giving them activities. Millennium Burial Mound, I wanted to trick out this pagoda that the animals are leaving furiously. I wanted to make an animal protest movement. If they could have their placards, what would they say? So there's a lot of Beckett and Bible phrases and the sort of Revelations-esque ones. And anyway, the animals are pissed off. This one, I'm thinking about setting up camp. I'm thinking about what do we need when everything falls apart and we have to remake things. Do we need hedge fund guys? I don't know. Maybe they're some of the trustees of the Vermont Studio Center. Maybe. So I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But so I'm thinking here about what do we actually need. So we need the buriers, people who bury the old, the builders, the mad scientists, the lovers, the mothers, the fishers. That sort of thing. And we need the dreamers. So there's a guy suspended in front of that Rubens abduction of the daughters of Leucippus, which is, so there he is dreaming. And then there's all those images of wisdom behind. All these paintings that have given me wisdom. Self-portrait dressing wounds. I'm just sort of the metaphor of bandaging myself and bandaging my situation, while also tricking it out to make it a habitat. And there on that little shelf are the heads of some of the hedge fund guys, Jamie Dimon, So, this is my little way of saying, we don't need you, Jamie Dimon. Oh, in the last show, we did a tree sculpture. So this is my tree sculpture, which I'm madly in love with. So here's some details. So we took this gorgeous silver birch and we burrowed knots into it and then created these little worlds. And wove a system of branches that were full of, ladders and chutes and ladders. that game, ways up, ways down, and built termite mounds that had things growing out of them, and made those mushrooms. Oh, I don't have any more. Anyway, it was I became a sculptor. For anybody who I'm going to see who's a sculptor, now I can say I made a sculpture. John the Baptist, we're getting close. John the Baptist, Sky is Falling. I wanted to create a trampoline that could hold the sky as it falls. So, and there's also some heads of Scalia and the Koch brothers, and the other guys. We got their heads. There's Jamie Dimon again, poor guy. I keep focusing on him. This is can't remember the name of it, but this is again, remaking the world, sending out the old, bringing in the new, creating my own architecture for how we might want to live when the waters rise. Here it is again, when the waters rise. Dealing with the calamity, bringing in our backpacks, our garbage, repurposing our garbage, and now we're hitting the end. What do we need? The old idols. Do we need the old idols? How do we? How do we repurpose the old ways for our new set of needs? So here, the tree becomes again the kind of potential habitat, the place where you can strive, you can escape the waters, you can make nests above. So there's a lot of climbing and falling and climbing and falling. And the things that are beautiful are, I'm safeguarding up in the tree. On the brink, they're playing poker inside the little tent. As they're going over. Gulf cleanup plan. This is kind of the most obnoxiously screed-ish of them, where I've got all these oil pipelines that are fractured and spilling and creating havoc. But again, in the tent is a world. Is it a refuge? Is it a nightmare? It's kind of both. I think this might be the last one. After Hurricane Sandy, the park, Prospect Park, where I live nearby, was full of downed trees. All the trees fell. And then the next day, practically, they were sawed up in neat piles. So, it's the idea of hiding our calamities. So this started out a painting about just a neat pile of logs, and then it grew and grew and grew and grew and grew until it became this raft. So this is self-portrait as emergency shipwright. And again, it's a place for all the things she wants to keep. Alternatives, because creativity in the end will out. So yeah, that's the last one. So thank you for listening.